Welcome back, folks. I'm Dan.
And I'm Joe. And folks, today we have a great subject. First off, before we get into this subject, Dan and I want to say that we never been in a North Korean prison. Never
Nope.
been there.
Hell
We've
to the no.
we've read stories, and by the way, and legit media sources.
Yes.
And so, but before we get into this further, Dan, what do we have to do?
Well, Joe, the folks, we'd appreciate it if you'd like, subscribe, share, bang the notification bell. Also, perhaps follow us on Facebook and Instagram and X, formerly known as Twitter. So, Joe, what shall we start with?
Today's subject is that it's a philosophical descent into an unthinkable horror, the abyss of North Korean prisons. And again, folks, we admit we've never been in one. I've been to South Korea. I think, Dan, you've been to South Korea too, right?
I have.
Yeah. Been on the DMZ, but obviously we neither of us and very few people walking the earth have been to North Korea prison. How familiar are you, Dan, with this subject?
About North Korean prisons, I've read my fair share. Don't forget, I studied IR for both my first bachelor's and master's. So we read quite a bit about North Korea and its politics. And unfortunately, right now, there's no concrete proof of this. These are just people's testimonies, just like in the 80s when people used to talk about Soviet gulags, but we
Right.
didn't have the official records before the collapse of the Soviet Union. So because the government is still ongoing in North Korea, we can't say for sure. But I have a hard time thinking these people would just make this up. This sounds pretty gruesome to make up.
Right. So I agree. So, folks, we're not claiming to be experts, but when we talked about philosophical voyagers, we cover a wide variety of subjects. So, Dan, without further ado, Dan, why don't you lead us into the first part of this video?
Well, welcome to a place where humanity doesn't just die, it's torn apart, piece by screaming piece. Korea's prison camps aren't just prisons, they're slaughterhouses. And for the human spirit, sprawling wastelands where the air chokes with the stench of rotting flesh, where bones crunch under boots, and where the living claw at their own skin to feel something other than despair. This is a journey into hell so grotesque, it'll haunt your nightmares. And it's real, and it's happening right now as we speak. You're about to hear stories so savage, you'll question your sanity afterwards. Stories about execution where blood pools are ankle deep, tortures where flesh peels are like wet parchment, and screams that echo in your skull forever. So, anyway, but then there's the philosophical take. What does it mean to be human when every shred of humanity is stripped away? When your name becomes a number, your body a punching bag, your existence a curse. Nietzsche warned, he who fights with monsters must take care lest he become a monster. But here, the monster doesn't just consume, it obliterates, leaving no self to fight back. This is the abyss staring back, a void where even the concept of self dissolves into screams. Jean-Paul Sartre wrote, "Man is condemned to be free, yet in these camps freedom is a mockery. Condemnation is absolute, of a prison, not just of bars, but of being itself." Albert Camus puts, there is but one truly serious philosophical problem, and that is suicide. But what happens when even suicide is denied? When the will to die is crushed under the weight of forced survival? These camps are a refutation of Immanuel Kant's categorical imperative. Act only according to that maximum whereby you can, at the same time, will that it should become a universal law. For here, the only law is cruelty, versalized into a machine that grinds souls to dust. Are we the watchers, complicit in the silence, or is our existence itself an absurd defiance of this horror? Then there's the leap of faith which falters here. Faith in what? When God and man alike have apparently abandoned the damned.
So, shocking fact with this, since the 1950s, folks, many believe around 200,000 people, men, women, and children, may have perished in these North Korean prison camps. Their bodies basically, many believe, were starved. Their bodies became skeletons beaten to pulps, or many believe dissolved in acid pits, all while the world turns a blind eye. Yes, and I understand there have been some human rights organizations to speak out about this. This source comes from the hidden gulag, and this is from David Hawk in 2012. And then we want to talk about a sprawling empire of doom. Korea's prison system basically is many believe will call a network of death. There are the political camps like Camp 14, Dan. Where's Camp 14, Dan? Where is it located, man?
Kachan. I believe
Yeah.
it's pronounced Kachan. Again, Camp 15 in Yoduk, and Camp 16 in Hwasong, Camp 18 in Bukchang, Camp 22 in Huiyang, Camp 25 in Chongjin.
Now, yeah. Many say though, in these particular camps, they estimate between 80 to 120,000 souls are trapped in their families. Some from, even believe it or not, infants to elderly. They're locked into a machine designed to grind them into dust. And this source between the 18 and 120,000, my friends, this comes from the UN Commission of Inquiry report. And if you want to look up that report, it was created in 2014. This source is on page 208. Picture
Yeah.
this, Dan, a
Yeah.
satellite imaginary in a camp known as Camp 16. Dan, it's 200 square miles in the mountains. It's guarded towers, the gray sky, the daggers, electrified fences buzzing with 3,000 volts. It's barracks packed with figures who are starving. Her bodies have turned to skeletons. Some have bled. Some have been so brutalized it looks like they look like death weren't over. Step inside. The
Mm-hmm.
air. It's one former prisoner testified. The air hits you like a fist, thick with the sour reek of urine. So the rotting sweetness of unwashed bodies. So, folks, this sounds crazy, but in parts of the world, folks, this actually happens. Dan,
Yeah,
tell me.
Joe. Yeah, Joe.
Yeah.
Before I get into more, I want to tell you when it says it locks up entire families. Yeah, if one person goes against the regime, they punish 3 generations. So, Joe, they would lock up your parents, and if you had children, they'd lock them up too. Or let's say you have a pregnant wife, she's going to get locked up, and when that baby gets born, that baby is going to be born a prisoner. Oh, they punish 3 generations.
Well,
And
there was a prison camp known as Camp 22, and this camp once held 50,000 prisoners. By 2012, they had satellite photos showed it empty. Some North Korean defectors said that mass executions wiped them out. Their
yeah,
bodies were buried in ovens or dissolved in vats of sulfuric acid, leaving no trace but smoke and screens. And what is the source? This is the satellite analysis in 2013, page 45. Children are born in these camps, just like Dan was talking about, are never registered with the states. They're considered a non-person.
hmm
Imagine being born, bred to suffer and die. Their births marked like a kick to their mother's stomach. Dan?
But yeah, here's some gruesome examples. In Camp 15, a man whispered about stealing food. When the guards heard him, though, they tied him to a wooden pole, slit his stomach open with a jagged knife, and let starving dogs rip out his intestines while he shrieked. His blood soaking the frozen ground as his wife was forced to watch. Another example, a woman in Camp 18 tried to shield her child from a beating guard, but the guards made her dig a shallow grave, then buried her alive. And her head
Well,
soil, muffled screams, they stomped the dirt flat. And by the way, kids in Camp 14, kids don't play with toys. They catch rats, ripping off their tails with their teeth, just just so they could have something to eat. Uh,
one defector saw a mass grave near Camp 15 when he defected to South Korea. 300 bodies were dumped in a pit, limbs tangled like grotesque spider webs, faces frozen in silent screams, some still twitching as dirt was shoved over him. And again, folks, I want to say, why do we talk about this? Because there's a whole world out there. And while
yeah.
many of us are fortunate, many are not. And this is some of the things that are going on in the world today, even though it's hard to believe. What is the philosophical take, Dan?
All right. Now, the question is, what is civilization if it spawns such abominations? These camps are a mirror reflecting humanity's darkest potential, a Kantian nightmare where reason doesn't enlighten but justifies barbarism. Yeah, and that's true, by the way. That was an excuse for colonialism in the 19th century. It was Enlightenment values. Thomas Hobbes wrote, "The life of man is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short." But here, in North Korean prison camp, it's worse. Life is a collective descent into a manufactured hell, where the social contract is a pact with annihilation. Michel Foucault argued power shapes reality, yet in these camps, power doesn't shape, it destroys, reducing existence to a raw, bleeding wound. In fact, yeah, are we all complicit in the silence? Or no, the question is, what can we do about it though? See, this is what I try to ask myself and think the only time I can give myself comfort knowing these things is A, I didn't cause these problems, and B, there's nothing I can do to stop it.
Well, some defectors talk about death and dignity. When you enter, allegedly, because obviously we're not there, and that's why I'm going to read some sources to the viewers. The entry process: new prisoners stumbled off trucks. Basically, their wrists are bound, wires are cutting into their flesh. Obviously, the guards are tearing away their clothes. Some defectors said the guards would laugh as they stripped them naked.
Mm-hmm.
Take massive, real freezing water, and they mix with human race, basically blistering their skin. Uh, with they're tearing their hair out in bloody clumps, leaving gashes. Names are erased. So basically, the names are erased and they're replaced basically with numbers scratched into their arms with filthy needles. And they brand them like cattle. And this was a testimony of Lee Soon Koo, Eyes of the Tailless Animals. This was out of a source called Eyes of the Tailless Animals.
But yeah, here's some shocking facts too. As I
Let me
mentioned
finish
earlier,
the source, Dan.
oh,
1999, page 34. This way the viewer can find this for themselves. Go ahead.
all right. All right. Well, as I mentioned, for shocking facts, about 3 generations being punished, a family of 12 was hauled into Camp 16 for owning a smuggled South Korean radio. The youngest, a 2-year-old, was beaten unconscious on arrival. The oldest, an 80-year-old woman, had her legs broken with a club. And the source is Korea Future Prison Database from 2022, tree number 145. Now, defectors report guards smashing newborn skulls under their boots as arrivals. Yeah, that's not unique to North Korea, unfortunately. No need to waste food on them, they say, as mothers wail and blood pools. And the testimony of Park Ji-hoon, a UN COI from 2014, page 267. So here's some more gruesome examples. Kim Hee-soo, at 13, she staggered into camp, her father beside her. Guards tied him to a post, whipped him with a leather strap, studded with nails. Ow, damn. And blood pooling the dirt again, his screams hoarse as they forced her to clap. They forced her to cheer, her father being beaten to death. That's common, though. I've heard that in other countries as well. And
Yeah. Camp 22, a 9-year-old arrived with his mother, punished for his uncle's escape. Guards strung him up by his wrists and pretty much beat him with bamboo rods. That's terrible. This is from a testimony from Ong Moon Chol, HRNK. This was back in 2003, page 71. And again, folks, these are testimony. And if they're lying, then they have a wicked mind, because I don't know how you can make. What about the pregnant woman, Dan?
oh yeah, the pregnant woman who stumbled into Camp 16. Guards pinned her down, slit her tummy open with a jagged blade without anesthesia, and then they yanked out her fetus, still squirming, and tossed it to the pigs that tore it apart. Her blood soaked in the ground as she gasped her last prayers. Wow, I didn't even know she knew how to pray in a place like North Korea. I thought pretty much being born there, you had no concept of a higher power whatsoever. This is also a testimony of Ji Hyun Ah, UNCI from 2014, page 289. Now, here's a philosophical take. Here, identity dies before the body. Your name, your past, your humanity, snuffed out in a hail of fists and filth. Jean-Paul Sartre's hell is for other people. It's too tame. This hell of annihilation of self, a place where existence precedes essence, only to erase both. And Martin Heidegger's, being in the world collapses here. You're not in the world, you're beneath it. Thing thrown into a void where meaning is beaten out of you. Let's see. What does Emmanuel Levinas say, Joe?
Well, Emmanuel Venus, he basically argued that the face of the others demand ethical responsibility. Basically, but what ethics survive when someone's face is smashed? So basically, where is the ethics? Are these folks in North Korea so obviously entrenched in society, so brainwashed? They have such allegiance, especially the ones that work inside the North Korean government that can see they're beating their fellow citizens and basically taking the life out of them. And that brings us to this, Dan, daily torment. Basically, a prison day from many testimonies when it comes to forced labor. It's like a 16-hour day. And imagine that, just that alone, where your body is breaking under the weight of doing all these tasks. Like, for example, coal mining in pitch black tunnels. Basically, think about this, when your lungs are filling with dust and
Hmm.
they hack up blood and through icy mud, their spines are curving. Uh, they're sewing military uniforms. These are some of the tasks they do allegedly in these North Korean prisons.
Hmm.
Sewing military uniforms with needles that pierce their fingers to the bone, and
Oh yeah,
yes, blood coming on the fabric. They're dripping onto the fabric. So guards smashing your knees with hammers, and this is according to the UN COI report back in 2014, page 231. Talk
and now
about
let's take a look at, yeah, do you think they're fed well? Because I don't think, oh, wait, no, they're not fed well. Rations are mockery. 150 grams of rancid corn, gruel, gray and moldy, crawling with fat white worms, speckled with gravel that cracks teeth. And as they choke down centipedes that slid around their throats, slit open dead rats with a nail to suck the sour meat out. Ooh, and that's the source from Shin Dong-hyuk with the book Escape from Camp 14 back in 2012 on page 112. And then there's physical decay. Within weeks, your skin turns ashen gray, clinging to jutting bones like wet cloth. Teeth rot and crumble, littering the floor like pebbles. Hair falls out in greasy clumps. I think we went over that. Frostbite, ooze, yeah.
Well, some shocking facts. Basically, in 2019, a Korea Futures report found 40%. This is shocking, but really shocking. 40% of North Korean prisoners die within their first year. Many of starvation through exhaustion, many through being beaten by the guards. And allegedly, Camp 18 guards forced prisoners to eat their own vomit to survive. Those who gagged were beaten with clubs until their jaws hung loose. This is terrible stuff. What
Yeah.
about some other? And there's more gruesome examples. We can go on, but Dan, what about the philosophical take?
Life here is a cruel jest, according to Arthur Schopenhauer's Will to Live. Twisted into a will to suffer, a blind, relentless drive that chains these prisoners to their torment. Albert Camus saw life as absurd, Sisyphean struggle against meaningless rock, but here, rock crushes them daily, and there's no defiance, only submission into an indifferent void. Jean-Jacques Rousseau's Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains is inverted. Here, man is born in chains, and freedom is a dream of beaten out of existence. Nietzsche says, "What does not kill me makes me stronger." Well, it's not very valid here. These survivors aren't stronger. They're hollowed, they're traumatized, they're just shattered completely. And then does meaning persist? Well, Viktor Frankl argued that in the face of Auschwitz, or is a place where suffering has no purpose, no redemption, just an endless echo of agony. Arendt's radical evil finds an apex here, not just the absence of good, but the presence of malice so pure it defies reason. Is survival a victory when or just prolonging of the nightmare? Or have we misunderstood the human condition entirely? Because I'll tell you, the more I learn about humans through reading history, I learn we're not nice creatures overall.
Well, the art of breaking the soul. Let's talk about stress positions. What happens it's known in North Korean former North Korean prisoners, so it's say stress positions. Basically, a lot of North Korean prisoners are forced to kneel on jagged rocks with their arms twisted behind their backs until their shoulders pop from sockets. Many prisoners have testified that they had bamboo sticks rammed between their fingers and crushed. One former prisoner said that he saw another prisoner's bones snap like dry twigs. So, and then they would have to hold this pose for days, and these poor people are screaming in torment. And if you want to know more about this, folks, the hidden gulag and
Mm-hmm.
page 101. Basically, what about the burning with guards, heat, iron pokers, in coal fires until they glow red, and then
Hmm.
they press them into the prisoner's flesh. And constant beatings, Dan. Constant,
Yeah. By
constant.
the way, I've not yet read it, but have you heard about the series The Gulag Archipelago?
I've
Have
heard of
you?
it, but I haven't read it neither. So I heard someone mention it as I was watching some documentaries on this.
Yeah, but these are the similar stories to what you'd hear in a Soviet gulag. Oof. It makes me
You
still
know,
think of where I grew up. I'll tell
Yeah,
you.
shocking facts here. A 2014 UN Commission of Inquiry document. There was 80 distinct torture methods, and
Hmm.
some were so horrific that UN investigators basically broke down in tears. So it tells you how brutal, and this tells you how some people are their conscience and their heart is so far gone. I couldn't imagine doing this to another human being.
Yeah. Well, Jordan Peterson, he mentioned something pretty interesting. He said that when we read about the atrocities of what humans have done, we can imagine ourselves as inmates, but it's a lot harder to accept that we could also be the guards if we're not careful. With our way of thinking, all it takes is what defending our beliefs, and a lot people are just as capable of being guards as they are inmates. Do you agree with that, Joe?
You can, yes, it can happen. And people say, "Well, how can it happen?" You'll be shocked.
Yeah.
Uh, I'm sure there's a lot of leaders in the world, or people when they were growing up didn't think they were capable of such acts. And again, what about sexual violence? The defilement of innocence, Dan.
Mm.
There's a rape epidemic in these prisons too, allegedly.
Of course.
About how guards go to the women's barracks, dragging girls as young as 10, and this is just terrible. And what they do to these girls, what they again, it's terrible. And this also, folks, if you want to study this topic deeper, is a source called UNCOI report, and it is
Huh.
again this particular report was printed back in 2014. Page and this particular story about how some of these women were raped and abused in page 283. Dan, what about the forced abortions?
Oh yeah, pregnant women are strapped to splintered tables, their legs forced apart, guards slice their bellies with rusted knives. Yeah, this is the third time I've mentioned such a thing. Yeah, I've already mentioned this part. And this the testimony of Park Ji Hyun from UNCOI from 2014, 268.
Well, here's a fact. Oh, go ahead, Dan. Finish your thought, and I'll give you this fact.
No, that was it. That was it. I was finished.
Back in 2021, a Korean Futures report found 70% of female prisoners suffer sexual violence. Many die from internal ruptures. Their bodies have been discarded like trash. The source is Korean Future Prison Database 2021 summary report. If you folks want to read more about it. And how the guards treat these poor women like livestock. If allegedly, if this is true, well, I don't think these people would lie. Is disgusting, and they once again had investigators in tears. Uh, Dan,
Mhm.
it's I think we should talk about the Dan, give the
Yeah.
philosophical take.
All right. Here, the body becomes a battlefield. Innocence is a myth shattered by brutality. All right, I'm gonna see if I pronounce her name right. Simone de Beauvoir. Beauvoir.
Sounds yeah,
Yeah. Second,
yeah.
her concept of second sex isn't just subjugated; it's completely obliterated. Womanhood is a death sentence scrawled in blood. And Nietzsche's, according to Friedrich Nietzsche, the weak and the botched shall perish. First principle of our charity finds a grotesque echo, and yet here the weak don't perish quietly; they're torn apart brutally, and in front of a lot of people. And Judith Butler's gender is performance that collapses. Gender isn't performed, it's punished. It's reduced to target violation. No, this is. So, does humanity's essence survive this, as Viktor Frankl might hope? Or is this the point where essence itself is aborted, where the soul is miscarried alongside the body? This isn't just violence, it's a philosophical annihilation. Question mark stabbed into the fabric of being.
Well, we'll talk about They also is a thing the investigators found called the festivals of blood, and the executions in these prisons are allegedly weekly rituals. Or and sometimes they could be hourly. And basically they stage them in muddy courtyards. These crowds of skeletal prisoners, meaning they're so weak, their bodies look because they're malnourished and they've been beaten. They're forced to cheer or join the pile of
Hmm.
corpses. And again, folks, this is some of the methods are strangulation. They're roped. They put thick ropes around their necks. This is some of this stuff is just utterly disturbing.
Joe, I got to ask you a question. If you had to be executed, but you got to choose, what would you choose?
Gee, that's a tough question. I guess just make it fast. I guess put a bullet in my head. I don't know, man. What would you choose?
I'd choose a firing squad. If I had to
Yeah,
be executed, I'd
make
choose a
sure
firing.
you hit me though. I'll tell them. Make sure you get me straight between the bullseye.
Yeah, I just say make it quick. I don't want to hang. I don't want to get poked with a needle, and I definitely don't want to sit in a gas chamber. If I have to be executed by the state, I'd like it to be by bullets.
There's also stoning. Prisoners are hurl rocks.
Yeah.
Shooting, fire. Right, just imagine that. You just said it. Firing squads. They aim low on purpose. Bullets will rip through the stomachs. Prisoners
Hmm.
will the blood. They're bleeding everywhere. And back in 2013, this supposed Camp 15 executed 80 prisoners in one day.
Yeah.
Guards were laughing.
Yeah, and,
And
and they also bet on guards bet on survival times. Imagine that. You're starving, you're suffering, and someone's betting on which one's going to die first. Kids are young as 4 are trained to stone their parents, and I don't mean give them weed or anything else. I mean throw rocks at them till they die. In fact, a man was stoned by a fellow inmate for stealing bread, but then his wife was forced to throw the final killing blow. That's according to HRNK testimony from 2005, page 42. A woman in Camp 16 was hanged. The rope snapped, so the guards beat her head in with rocks. Blood soaked in the dirt. Yeah, predictable, right?
well, yeah, and again, some of these folks, some of these stories, folks, again, as we've sourced this out, and like I said, it's disturbing even talking about. But I think to talk about this, Dan, is also to make the rest of the world aware. This stuff goes on. Sometimes we get caught up in our lives, and sometimes we may complain, "Is woe is me." Then I look at stuff like this and research, and it's like it makes me do a double take about how fortunate we really are.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
and there's some more of these stories, like Chronicles of the Damned. It seems like one poor woman named Kim Young Soon in prison for gossip, and she said she was forced to watch her 4-year-old son starve. And then you got how do you even pronounce this one? Ang Moon Cho. As a guard, he saw 300 kids die in a month. These are some of the things, folks. Unnamed survivor. Then this person didn't want to be identified. Guards, obviously, we just talked about raped the girl and burned her in gasoline. Dan, what is the philosophical take on this?
These are humanity's shadow. These are shadows of humanity. Carl Jung's collective unconscious turned septic, a dark reservoir of pain spilling over into reality. Albert Camus asked, "Is life worth living?" But here the question is, well, irrelevant, almost rhetorical. To be living in a life, to be living in a North Korean prison, life is punishment right there. As for Nietzsche's quote, "What is done out of love always takes place beyond good and evil," but that's plain perverted. As a North Korean, nothing's done out of love, only hate, and a hate so pure, all morality goes out the window. As Jean Paul Sartre says, c'est true, man is the future of man. Well, that ideology goes out the window. In the North Korean prison camps, the future is a grave dug by the hands of the present. Yeah. So, anyways, and now for the living dead, rotting while alive. Now, I'll tell you, people talk about fearing death, and that's pretty common. Sure, I fear the moment of it, but I fear living and suffering much more than I do being dead. But as for a North Korean prison conditions, cells are cesspits, lice infested, which open wounds, Feces coat the floor. Screams blend with the stomach of gangrene. Walls slick with mold and blood. Ooh. And there's
Well,
plenty of disease like tuberculosis. I mean,
a shocking fact in 2020, a 2020 report, and this report is this is from the testimony of Kim Hae-suk. 2020 report found 60% died from disease, no medicine, just agony. And that's from Korean Future back in 2020. And it talks about, a man's leg was rotting off. And this look, some of this stuff is just disturbing. And you hear the stories, you see the documentaries, then reading some of these reports, it's just how can humanity just sink so low? The philosophical take, Dan. I'll start it off. The body betrays the soul. Martin Heidegger's being towards death is no longer a horizon, but a present reality. And what that means is, folks, when these folks that are suffering in a prison like this, death becomes a reality. And it's sad to say, many look forward to it because they're suffering so bad.
yeah. Arthur Schopenhauer's is quoted as saying, "Life is a business that does not cover the cost." And in these camps, that's literalized. As Nietzsche says, the thought of suicide is a great consolation, but that's a cruel taunt. Suicide's impossible, apparently. Consolation to fantasy, which is off topic, but I heard that in Soviet gulags, some people were so miserable that they knew they couldn't escape and they couldn't commit suicide. Some would actually try to save up money to bribe a guard to shoot them. You ever heard of
Wow.
that?
Yes, actually, yes. And then the shift towards, the escape. There, believe it or not, folks, there have been people that have managed to escape from these North Korean hellholes. Freedom's bloody price. And this Shangdong Hook, and if my pronunciation isn't perfect, folks, forgive me. He climbed over his friend's charred corpse. 3,000 volts burned his legs. Stench of death his guide. This is from the Escape from Camp. Page
14.
140, Escape from Camp 14, page 149. Fewer than 50 escapes have been confirmed. Most have unfortunately been recaptured and families butchered. Dan, a gruesome example of failed escapees. Oh man, tongue was cut, left to bleed as his kids were shot. South Korean Futures, this is 2022. Entry
Yeah.
412. Dan, it's just talking about this, and when we're deciding to do this, it's just, we said we are going to be a philosophical voyage, just talk about anything.
Yeah. This
And we
includes
realize to the viewer, this could be painful, but this at the same time, this stuff happens.
It does.
Yes.
It does happen. Now, here's something else. This is a controversial statement, but unfortunately, repeat, unfortunately, it's neither new nor unique to communism. Most unfortunately, as I read books about international history, including Thomas Sowell, I'd learned people of different religious practices, even before the birth of Christianity or Islam, would do just the most horrific things, tortures. They would say things like they would kill, I think it was the Assyrians, would kill someone's children right in front of them right before they took out their eyes. So you live to be blind, and the last thing you remember seeing was your own children being killed. That's what they
Dan,
experienced.
it's like an abyss staring back to the world, and these people feel helpless and they're crying for help. There's here in March 2025, thousands still suffer. And you can imagine other prisons around the world. We're talking about North Korea. And makes me think and do a double take. There are people literally in this world suffering, not just in North Korea, but in other parts of the world. But we're focusing on North Korea. And Dan, what can we do? What can we do to?
Well, first off, I want to know if we're even redeemable or damned by our own inaction. As Immanuel Kant, kingdom of lies, kingdom of ends lies in ruins. But what can we do? Okay, and this sounds so yesterday, but the only thing we can do is make people aware that it exists. But I guarantee you, enough people will think it's too gruesome to think about, and they say, and as I said earlier in the podcast, sometimes the only thing that gives me any comfort is that I know I can't do anything about it. I have absolutely no control of the situation.
Well, Dan, if we glaze into the abyss, it gazes back. If we stare too long, it can change us. So,
Yeah.
and again, that's a philosophical saying. But folks, this video, we hope, again, we know the topic is controversial, but it needs to be discussed. And these things do happen, unfortunately, in our world. Dan?
Well, I have nothing to add. So, do you have anything to add, Joe?
No, I do not. I hope and pray that this message gets out and these folks get miraculously get help. Please like, subscribe, share, bang that notification bell, folks. You can also follow us on Twitter, now X, formerly known as Twitter. So
Instagram, Facebook, you name it. We're getting all over the place, folks.
So pass the video around, share with your friends and family, and tell others. Until then,
Have a great one, folks. Have a great day or night wherever you are in the world.
thank you.